There is a particular feeling that lives just below a decision you never finished making. Not a wound, not a longing. Something quieter than both, and somehow heavier. The moment you almost said something and didn't. The moment you almost let yourself fully think the thought and redirected it before it completed itself. The moment you came to the edge of something and stepped back. Not because you were afraid, but because some part of you understood, without being able to articulate why, that the crossing wasn't ready yet. You've been living inside that almost for a long time now. Not with drama, not with visible suffering, with a kind of quiet interior management, a practiced, near-automatic rerouting that happens before the full weight of the feeling can arrive and settle somewhere permanent. You learn to do this so well that most days it doesn't feel like effort. It simply feels like who you are. But the body keeps a different record. And the body does not forget what the mind has chosen to contain. You are here today because something in you recognized, at a level below reasoning, below language, that the containing is almost over. Not because you decided to stop, because the energy shifted today, specifically and precisely, and what held the buried feeling in place no longer has the same support it had yesterday. The planets moved into a configuration that does not respect containment strategies. What has been living below the surface of your days is pressing upward, and the pressing has changed in quality. It's no longer the familiar background ache. It's the specific feeling of something arriving. You didn't find this transmission by algorithm. Something that has been working through your life, something with a longer perspective than the one you apply to your own days. Brought you here at this exact moment because this is the moment you are ready to receive what follows. Before we go deeper, like this video, subscribe and comment below. I'm ready to receive, not as a wish, as a declaration. Your nervous system hears what you say out loud. That phrase is a door. You're choosing to walk through it. And if part of you is still trying to decide whether this is about who you think it's about, stay. Because what comes next is the part most people miss. What you've been doing with this feeling, the containing, the redirecting, the near constant low-level effort not to land fully inside it, that is not weakness. It is not avoidance either. It is something more specific than both of those words. At some point in the history of what you've been carrying, you made a quiet internal choice about what you would and wouldn't allow to govern your days. You didn't announce it. You didn't make it a position or a policy or a declaration. You simply decided, at a level below language, that you would not let this become the thing that ran you. That you would function, that you would show up, that you would build and move and live your life without making your interior chaos someone else's emergency and without letting it become your entire weather. That choice, at a specific fork where one direction was easier, where disintegrating, collapsing into the feeling, making it the organizing principle of your daily existence would have been entirely understandable. You chose the harder direction. Not loudly, not with announcement. Just a quiet internal turning that nobody witnessed and nobody confirmed was right. You held a standard without ever stating it. You registered at a level below drama, what you would and what you wouldn't accept. And you held that line without making it a performance. This is not a portal that opens for people who simply want resolution. It opens for people who earn the right to receive what they've been quietly, precisely waiting for. And you are one of those people. Now here is what actually happened in the sky today. Explained not in astrological vocabulary, but in terms of what it produces in human emotional experience. The moon in Pisces formed an exact trine to Venus in Cancer today at 7:04 in the evening. And then, just 94 minutes later, it formed an exact trine to Jupiter in Cancer at 8:38. Venus and Jupiter are less than 1 degree apart from each other, their own conjunction perfecting tomorrow, meaning their energy is fully merged, fully present, fully available as a single unified force today. The moon in Pisces moved through both of them in the same evening sky. This is not common, and it does not produce ordinary emotional weather. Here is what those planets are, as living forces in human experience. Venus is the part of you that knows what it wants before the mind has had time to build a case for wanting it. Venus does not argue. It does not justify. It orients. It is the force that recognizes beauty and connection and significance before a single word of explanation has been offered. Venus is pull, the kind that arrives in the body first, that has already made its decision before the rational mind has been consulted. Venus has been in Cancer for weeks. Cancer is the sign of deep emotional memory, of the people woven into the fabric of who you are, of the connections that don't fade even when time passes, even when distance intervenes, even when you do everything in your power to help them fade. In Cancer, Venus is not interested in anything shallow. It wants what it already knows. It wants what it remembers. Jupiter is the force that expands what it touches, not cautiously, not incrementally. Jupiter is the most generous, most amplifying planet in the solar system. When it contacts a feeling, the feeling grows past the boundaries that were supposed to contain it. Jupiter takes whatever is present and makes it larger, more undeniable, more impossible to manage within the old strategies. If Venus in Cancer is the memory of what the heart already knows it needs, Jupiter amplifies that knowing until it can no longer be filed or redirected or set aside. The moon is the planet of the interior tide. It governs what surfaces from beneath, the feelings that rise and recede on their own schedule, that do not respond to the mind's management strategies, that arrive in the small hours and in odd moments during perfectly ordinary days. The moon in Pisces, specifically, dissolves the walls between what you've been feeling and what you've been pretending not to feel. Pisces is the sign that understands, at a cellular level, that some things cannot be filed. They can only be received or resisted. And resistance under a Pisces moon becomes increasingly expensive. The energy required to maintain it exceeds the energy available. Today, this moon moves through an exact trine to both Venus and Jupiter in Cancer. A trine is the most harmonious aspect in astrology. It is not tension, not confrontation, not disruption. It is a channel. What flows through a trine moves cleanly, without obstruction, from one point to another. What flows through this channel today is the full, amplified, expanded emotional weight of what Venus in Cancer has been holding. The feeling that has been living below the surface of your daily management is not smaller than it was when you put it away. It is exactly the same size. And today, the moon opened the channel wide enough for it to move. This is not your psychology destabilizing. This is not a crisis. This is the universe creating a specific window, measured in hours, precise in its timing, in which what is real is allowed to surface. Not because you decided to allow it, because the planetary configuration makes it surfacing the path of least resistance. This is not confusion. This is clarity arriving in the form it always arrives, not as a thought you chose, but as a fact that was already there. Now here is why this does not open for everyone. This portal activates for a specific kind of person. Not everyone who feels something complicated. Not everyone who has an unresolved connection. It activates for the person who felt something that didn't fit neatly into the story they were supposed to be living, and chose not to betray either the feeling or their own dignity in the process. The person who held a standard without ever stating it. Who knew, at a level below language, what they could accept and what they couldn't. And who registered when something fell below that line without requiring a dramatic confrontation, without needing the other person to acknowledge what was happening, without making it someone else's obligation to confirm that the standard existed. You've held something real for a long time without performing it for an audience. That is a specific kind of internal work that most people can't describe because it has no external markers. It doesn't look like strength. It doesn't look like suffering. It looks, from the outside, like ordinary life being lived. The internal reality was something else entirely. That was not love failing. That was love being honest about what wasn't ready. There is a version of the story where you received partial presence and called it enough, where you accepted ambiguity as the terms of the connection and organized your interior around those terms. You did not do that. That was not you being unworthy of receiving. That was them being unready to give. The distinction is not a small one. It determines where the actual limitation was located, and it was not in you. That was not the universe withholding. That was the universe building. What it was building was the version of you who can receive what's coming with enough internal clarity to recognize it accurately, without the distortion of old longing bending the signal. What the period of silence and distance built in you, without announcing its purpose, without offering any confirmation that the building was proceeding, is exactly the capacity that this transit requires you to have arrived with. The person this portal opens for did not force their way here. They held their hands clean. They kept their standard quietly intact. They did not reach when reaching would have been easy and justified and socially understandable. They did not perform their depth for someone who would have used it as evidence of being too much. That restraint is not regret. It is a credential, and it has just been recognized. Now here is the part that tends to hurt before it becomes freedom. If this energy had arrived in its full form 6 months ago, if the moon had made this exact trine to this exact Venus-Jupiter configuration before the silence had done its necessary work, the reunion would have felt like resolution and functioned as repetition. This is the specific version of the counterfactual that matters. Not that the connection was wrong, but that the context in which it would have been received was not yet right. The same dynamic in new language. The same cycle dressed in the clothes of a fresh start. You would have heard different words and felt, underneath them, the familiar shape reasserting itself. The old pattern would have worn the reunion as a costume. You would have recognized the costume and not the pattern beneath it, because the work that allows you to see the pattern clearly was not yet complete. This is why the universe delayed, not out of cruelty, not out of indifference, out of precision. There is a version of this story that almost happened, the one the silence prevented. And that version would have cost you something you cannot name, because you would never have known what you lost. You would have spent the next year inside a cycle that looked different from the previous one, and produced the same fundamental result, with less left in reserve to work with next time. The universe does not delay the things that are meant to arrive. It delays the circumstances until both the thing and the person who will receive it are ready to do so without damage. What is different now is not that enough time passed. Passing time is not what changed. What changed is that the question you are carrying into the connection, whether you are enough, whether what you feel is real, whether you deserve to receive the fullness of what you want from a connection, That question is no longer being asked from inside the same wound it used to emerge from. You are not asking it with the same urgency. You are not asking it with the same existential weight behind it. You are not asking it with need. And that is the only version of arrival that is safe to have, the one that arrives from wholeness rather than from the hunger for confirmation. The delay is over, not because the calendar moved forward, but because the thing the delay was waiting for happened inside you. Now, here is what is happening on the other side. The person connected to you has been building a case. That is what this person does. They reason their way into stillness. They construct a web of explanations for why the distance is appropriate, why the timing isn't right, why the silence is the considerate choice, why patience is the correct posture for both of them to hold right now. They built a story. The story made sense at the beginning. It served a real purpose at the beginning. It gave them a way to hold a feeling they were not ready to act on, to file it, to maintain it, to acknowledge its existence while simultaneously maintaining the distance they needed. But here is what the moon in Pisces trine Venus, trine Jupiter, does to a carefully constructed case. It introduces erosion, not dramatically. The way water moves through stone, quietly, persistently, without announcement, until the stone that looked solid reveals itself to have been hollow in the middle. The explanations begin to sound different when they're voiced in the interior. The reasons that once carried real weight now produce a strange flatness when rehearsed. The case begins to feel, from the inside, like an argument that no longer has a convinced prosecutor. They are watching their own reasoning fail, not all at once. In the specific way that a wall gives way just before it gives out entirely, slowly, then all at once. Then there is no pretending the solidity was ever as real as they needed it to be. The physical experience of this, something behind the eyes that requires effort to ignore. A quality of distraction during ordinary tasks that arrives specifically from one direction. The same direction every time, despite the rerouting. An awareness that keeps orienting toward you with a persistence that bypasses the reasoning they use to redirect it. They think of something practical, something present, something that belongs to the day they are inside. And then the thought is there again, unchanged, with its full emotional weight still intact. The wall they built to keep the feeling contained is coming down. Not because they decided to lower it, because it no longer holds. The moon in Pisces does not respect locked doors. It finds the places where the seal was never as airtight as it appeared, and it moves through those places with the specific gentle persistence of something that was never going to stay out forever. They know what they feel. Today is the day the knowing became too heavy to carry quietly on their own. What they do with that, whether they let the knowing translate into honesty, into action, into contact, remains their decision. That decision belongs to them, not to you. What belongs to you is the knowledge that the feeling is alive, that the case against it is failing, that the distance was always chosen and was never the whole truth. There is one more thing happening right now, on the other side of the silence. That changes the entire meaning of what you have been living through. They are not on the other side of this unchanged. The same transit that is surfacing what you buried in yourself is doing the same work in them. The same moon. The same channel moving through both of you at once. The question of what you do with this is yours. And you are standing at a fork that looks, from the outside, like it has no physical markers at all. No one is watching this moment. That is exactly what makes it the most important one. There is one way of being in this. You manage it. You monitor the space between you and them with the low-level alertness of someone waiting for a specific signal. You maintain the background process, the constant soft scanning for evidence of change, the anticipatory preparation of responses for several versions of what might arrive. You stay technically present to your own life while spending a significant portion of your interior on the situation. You can't quite bring yourself to either release or resolve. In this version of the moment, the connection is something you are watching from a careful distance rather than something you are actually inhabiting. The other way is not an action, not a reach, not a message or a declaration or a conversation that forces the issue. It is a change in internal orientation. It is the specific act of allowing what is actually happening in you, in the space between you, in the field that both of you are moving through simultaneously under this transit, to complete its arrival without interference, not reaching, not withdrawing, not managing the outcome toward the version of resolution you have decided is the acceptable one. Simply being present, fully, genuinely present to what is true right now, and allowing it to take the shape it is going to take without trying to correct that shape before it finishes forming. One of these states contracts the space available. The other opens it. You can feel the difference between them not as a thought, but as a physical sensation. One has a quality of tightening, a scanning quality, a vigilance quality, a quality of alertness that never fully settles. The other has a quality of something being set down, not the false calm of suppression, not the numbness of having stopped caring. The actual physical sensation of no longer carrying a process that was never yours to manage. The shoulders settling without instruction. A breath that goes 1 inch deeper than the last 3 months of breathing allowed. This is not the universe withholding. This is the universe waiting to see which version of you steps forward. The question that separates the two states is this: are you still trying to control how this resolves? Or are you ready to let it reveal itself in whatever form it actually is? Don't answer with the mind. Feel it in the body. The body already has the answer. It had it before the question finished forming. That question, held in the body rather than analyzed in the mind, will show you exactly where you actually are. Not where you intended to be, not where you hope you are, where you are. Now here is the deepest layer. The one that changes not just how you feel about this specific connection, but how you understand what it was always doing. This connection, whatever form it took, whatever it cost, whatever it produced that felt like loss, was never solely about what happened between you and another person. It was a contract. And contracts of this kind are not romantic arrangements. They are precise agreements between two souls about what must be activated, confronted, and genuinely understood before a new quality of connection becomes possible, either with this specific person or with anyone. The lesson this particular contract came to deliver was about timing, not patience as a virtue the viewer should cultivate. Timing as an inescapable reality. The understanding that love and genuine readiness must arrive simultaneously to be real. That the right person encountered at the wrong internal moment is still the wrong moment, regardless of how real the feeling is. That two people can be authentically drawn toward each other and still produce a dynamic that costs more than it creates, because the timing wasn't right inside one or both of them. This is the specific thing that is hardest to absorb. The love was real, and the timing was not. Both of those things can be true simultaneously. They do not cancel each other out. That truth lives in the body as a specific kind of grief. The grief of something that was genuine and was still, at a particular moment, premature. The grief not of something false, but of something real that arrived before the conditions for receiving it were fully in place. You are allowed to grieve the timing even as you accept it, without forcing them into a resolution that collapses one of them to make peace with the other. The grief is not weakness. Let it be full. Let it be what it actually is, not the grief of something destroyed, but the grief of something that needed more time than either of you had when you first arrived at it. Saturn enforces these soul contracts not with cruelty, but with precision. The lesson does not complete through time passing or pain being survived. The contract completes when the person genuinely, not performatively, no longer needs the connection to answer the foundational question they were carrying into it. In this case, whether they can hold love without forcing its arrival before both people are ready. That completion does not require reunion to be real. It does not require the other person's acknowledgement to be valid. It happened in you. It is already real. The contract did not promise an outcome. It promised a change in who you are, and that promise has already been kept. The contract was always about what you were becoming, not about whether they stayed to witness it. What you became is already real, regardless of what they do next. There is something happening in the body that is different from what was happening 3 months ago, and different again from 6 months ago, not dramatic. Nothing that could be pointed to easily from the outside. A quality of quiet that is not the same as numbness, and you know the difference between those two things now in a way you didn't used to know it. You have been in numbness. This is not that. Sleep arrives a little earlier than it used to, not every night, but the pattern is there, and it is legible. And in the first minutes of waking, when the residue of unresolved things used to sit in the body before the day had even begun its first demands, there is less of it now. The mornings are lighter than they were. Not because the situation has resolved externally, because something that was working very hard has eased. A name, the specific name, if you know which one this is about, now moves through awareness without the body organizing itself around it the way it once did. Where it used to arrive with a quality of bracing, a subtle tightening before the full emotional charge could land, it now arrives and passes through with something more like weather. Present, acknowledged, and then continuing on. It no longer takes up permanent residence in the nervous system for the rest of the hour. You may notice that you can be genuinely inside small moments now in a way that wasn't available before. A cup of something warm, a specific quality of afternoon light, a conversation with someone who isn't carrying anything complicated toward you. These moments arrive in their full size. Where they once slid past because some portion of your attention was perpetually allocated to something else, something unresolved, something that required monitoring. They now land and are felt as what they are. The jaw releases in the middle of ordinary sentences without being asked. The shoulders settle without instruction. These are the nervous system's own reports about what has changed. Not messages it's sending to be noticed, but facts about what is happening below the level of conscious management. This is not detachment. This is integration. The body stops preparing for loss, not as a decision, but as a biological evolution. And in the space that vigilance was occupying, something quietly begins to open. What follows this shift is not dramatic. There are no announcements, no visible markers. What changes is the quality of dailiness, the texture of ordinary life lived from the inside of it. Decisions become cleaner. Not because the situations become simpler, they don't. Because the internal conflict at the root of the difficulty has dissolved. The split between the version of you that needs a specific external outcome and the version that is capable of receiving whatever genuinely arrives. That split has closed. There is now one direction instead of two competing ones. The drag is gone. Where it once took active effort to hold a standard, I deserve to be met fully, not partially, not intermittently, not when it's convenient. It now takes effort to understand why it was ever negotiable. Something shifted at the root. What could live here before simply cannot live here now? Not because a decision was made about it, because the internal ground is different, and different ground cannot support the same structures. What used to feel like excitement, the crackling, uncertain energy of something that was never quite stable, that required constant management to maintain, now registers differently. Earlier, before it even fully arrives, the body identifies the quality. And instead of the familiar pull toward the unstable, there is something more like clear recognition. The body knows this pattern. The body has paid the specific price of this particular pattern. The body is simply no longer interested. What used to feel like the ceiling of what was available to you, the connection that required you to make yourself smaller, quieter, less insistent on being met, now reveals itself as a boundary you have genuinely moved past. The version of love that required that cost doesn't have an open door in you anymore. Not because you closed it, because you grew past it. The universe is no longer trying to guide you toward alignment. It is beginning to respond to the alignment you already carry. Synchronicities shift their character in this window. They stop feeling like nudges towards something you haven't yet reached. They start feeling like confirmations of where you already stand. There is a directional difference. One is searching, one is being found. The posture is different. The feeling is different. You are quietly already being found. The part of you that needed outside confirmation to feel certain has completed its work. What remains does not require reflection to stay real. It simply is. That is not a small change. That is the whole change. After this activation, certain things are no longer structurally available to the nervous system, not as a decision that can be unmade, as a fact about what the body will and will not accommodate from this point forward, being held at emotional arm's length by someone who knows exactly what they feel. This specific dynamic, the one where the other person is fully aware of their interior and has chosen, for reasons that belong entirely to them, to keep that awareness private while you carry the weight of an unacknowledged connection. The nervous system once absorbed this. It found ways to make the arm's length feel like something other than what it was. It called the distance complexity and timing and circumstance. It no longer has the capacity for that translation. What arrives, presenting itself as arm's length, is identified as arm's length immediately, before the story that explains it has finished being told. Carrying the full weight of a connection while the other person remains comfortable in its ambiguity. This is a specific kind of cost. Not the cost of loving someone who doesn't love you back, but the cost of loving someone who does and has decided that acknowledging it publicly, internally, or directly is not a cost they're currently willing to pay. Where you once absorbed this imbalance, where you found ways to be present for a dynamic that was fundamentally one-directional in its emotional labor. The absorption is no longer available. The body identifies the imbalance before the mind has assembled the evidence. Explaining your depth to someone who treats your explanation as evidence you are too much. This is the pattern that is almost elegant in its specific cruelty. Where genuine disclosure, the act of revealing something real about your interior, becomes material for a case being constructed against your worthiness. Where the more honestly you speak, the more evidence accumulates that you are excessive. The body, after the period of work this portal required, recognizes this pattern the way a trained ear recognizes a wrong note without having to think about it. The identification is immediate. It precedes deliberation entirely. The note is wrong before the mind has named it, waiting for honesty that the other person has already decided you don't deserve. The waiting is not over because the honesty arrived. The waiting is over because you stopped organizing your interior around the possibility of its arrival. The waiting dissolved not through resignation, but through the completion of needing it. What is available to you now is not less than what was available before. It is more specific, more real, and it will recognize you immediately because you have become impossible to miss. If this person steps back into your field now, after the distance and the silence and the careful construction of reasons for staying away, they will not be returning to the version of you that held the space open and waited. Not because you've changed the surface presentation. You haven't become someone unrecognizable. But the ground underneath you is different in a way that will be legible to someone who has been paying attention, even from a distance. The version of you who needed their return to feel whole, who organized a portion of your interior around the specific question of whether they would come back. That version has completed its contract and stepped aside. The question you will have, and it is genuinely yours to answer in your own time, from your own interior, is not whether you still feel what you feel. You know the answer to that, too. The love, if it was real, does not require the old dynamic to survive in order to remain real. The question is whether what arrives is the same version of the pattern or something that has actually changed. You are not waiting with held breath for this answer. You are present, grounded, capable of seeing clearly without hope, distorting the signal in one direction and fear distorting it in the other. You have done enough internal work to read accurately, to see what is actually there rather than the story you used to need to tell about what was there. Where once the longing bent what you saw, where partial presence looked like full presence, where ambiguity read as devotion in the process of arriving. The signal now lands without that distortion. You will see what is actually present. You will feel, in the body, the difference between someone who transformed and someone who simply missed the feeling. Presence will be the instrument of that reading, not words, not gestures, not explanations. Presence, sustained, consistent, unperformed. If what returns is real, the body will register it as real before the mind has assembled the case for believing it. If it is the same pattern wearing different clothes, that will register too, earlier, more clearly, with more certainty than it ever did before. If this soul does not return, if the distance continues and the case they've been building against honesty holds long enough for this transit to pass, that outcome also confirms something true. The growth the connection was meant to catalyze has already happened. It happened in you. The relationship was the means, not the destination. And the means has served its purpose. Whether they arrive or not, you are no longer defined by which one happens. That is the shift. That is everything. One thing before you go. If this reached you, like the video, subscribe. And leave your word in the comments. I'm no longer waiting. Say it out loud. Not for anyone reading, for yourself. And if someone you know needs to hear this, send it. You don't need to explain why. They'll know. What is already here doesn't need to be announced to be real. It doesn't need the right external confirmation to carry full weight. The feeling you've been managing and redirecting and carefully containing, it was never smaller than it felt. It was never less significant than the part of you that tried to make it manageable needed to believe. And today, in this specific window created by the moon, moving through its exact trine to both Venus and Jupiter in Cancer, that feeling has arrived at the surface. Not as disruption, as completion. What has been buried is no longer buried. What was contained is no longer containable. And what surfaces after a long containment does not need to be grasped at or explained or made to mean something before it's finished arriving. It needs only to be received, quietly, in the body, with the full weight of your actual presence. That is how arrival feels when the wait is genuinely over. Not loud, not sudden, not like an announcement. Like a door that opened while you were looking the other way, and you turned around to find it had been standing open for longer than you realized, waiting for you to simply walk through.